Our next speaker today is Jeannie Smith, who is the daughter of Polish rescuer Irene Opdyke, who passed away on May 18, 2003. A brave and inspiring figure, Irene received international recognition for her life-saving actions during the Holocaust while working for a high-ranking German official. Irene's story was told on Broadway in an internationally acclaimed show, Irene's Vow, starring Tova Feldsha. Irene's book, In My Hands, Memories of a Holocaust Rescuer, relays the detailed account of her life during the years of World War II and is used in classrooms around the country. All of you will be receiving a copy of this book. The Israeli Holocaust Commission named Irene one of the righteous among the nations, a title given to those who risked their lives by aiding and saving Jews during the Holocaust. She was presented with the Israeli Medal of Honor, Israel's highest honor, in a ceremony at Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Museum. The Vatican has given Irene a special commendation, and her story is part of the permanent exhibition at the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington. Jeannie resides in Washington State with her husband, Gary. She's a mother of 3, a foster parent, a grandmother of 5, and a surrogate mother to dozens more. She's part of the Oregon and Washington Holocaust Speakers Bureau, a regular speaker for the Anti-Defamation League, and an honorary member of North American Jewish Federation. She travels full-time, sharing her mother's story with groups across the United States, Canada, and the UK. The story she shares speaks to the horrors and hate of the Holocaust, but also brings a message of faith, love, and hope that good can triumph over evil. It proclaims the conviction that one by one, we can say no to hatred, persecution, and prejudice. The story speaks of the power of love and encourages an undeniable truth. One person can and does make a difference. Welcome, Jeannie.
Thank you. So, can everybody see me okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
Yeah, this is like if you asked an Italian person not to use their hands when they're speaking. I'm used to walking around, so bear with me. I would like for you to pretend that my mother's telling this story, and if she was, you'd see this woman with white fluffy hair and these big blue eyes and an accent like Zsa Zsa Gabor's. She would sound like this. Good afternoon, my darling childrens. I am so happy seeing all your beautiful faces, and I want you to know that I've come here today because I love you. And she would mean that with her whole heart. And it truly is my prayer every time I have the opportunity to share her story that we could all feel that love, because we could all use a whole lot of it. Mom was born in Poland. She was the oldest of 5 beautiful sisters, she used to say. Her father was an architect. Her mother was a homemaker. And when my mom graduated high school, her dream was to become a nurse. And so her parents sent her away to nursing school. She'd never been away from home before. And so it was exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time. She'd only been to school a week, maybe 10 days, when one morning she walked out of the campus, and it had been the start of a sunny day, but she said the sun was gone because overhead there was airplanes flying all over, dropping bombs everywhere. Without any notice, Hitler had invaded Poland, and all communication was cut off at that point. Mom couldn't find out if her parents and her sisters were okay. They couldn't find out about her. They did what they could there at this school. They turned it into a makeshift hospital where they took care of people that were wounded and injured. But 16 days later, Stalin also invaded Poland from the other end. And just like that, her whole country was gone. Mom said one afternoon, shortly after that, there was a group of people who came by. They called themselves the Polish Underground, the partisans. They were looking for volunteers, people to join up and go and fight the enemies that had taken over their country. And some of the teachers joined up, and Mom, who was still not quite 18 years old, joined up too. They actually had to go into the forest to live. They dug holes in the forest floor. They covered themselves with tarps. They had some ammunition, some radios, but it starts getting really cold in Poland in the fall. And they didn't have enough supplies or warm clothing. So a small group decided to go to a nearby town to get some more things. And Mom was part of this group. She said they had to walk through the forest until they got to the edge of the road that would lead to town. And when they got there, the older people in the group said, Irene, you stay back, mark the trail. We'll go get what we need and come back. So she said she stood there all by herself. And she said she couldn't see it, but she could smell it, a bakery at the edge of town, baking hot, fresh cinnamon rolls. You know how good that smells. When you're starving, the smell was hypnotizing. And she said, I just stood there taking in this aroma, concentrating so hard on that she didn't see or hear a truck full of Soviet soldiers coming her way. But those soldiers saw her. Several of them jumped out of the truck and chased her. She ran as fast as she could, but they caught her and beat her, ripped her clothes off, gang raped her, and left her for dead in the snow. I don't know how long she laid there, but eventually another truck full of Soviet soldiers came by. This time they saw her body lying there. They stopped, picked her up, threw her in the back of their truck, dropped her off at a Soviet hospital, where she stayed for a long time because her injuries were really severe. But eventually she figured out a way to get out of that hospital. She was already a prisoner of war and she wasn't free to leave, but she was able to get out of the hospital, fit through a little crack in the fence, and she ran as fast as she could. She wasn't even sure where she was, but she hoped maybe a town or two away. She had an aunt that lived in that area, and so this time, very carefully, she made her way through the streets. But one evening, she said she came to a part of the city that was just weird. The streets were empty, doors to buildings and houses left wide open, windows broken, no one in sight. It was getting late and she was tired, so she found a building, went upstairs, fell asleep on a second-story floor. But in the morning, she heard screaming and shouting down in the street. So she woke up, she went to the window and she looked down and she saw a sight no one was meant to see. Our history books refer to it as a death march. But what Mom saw was a mass of people being herded down the street like they were cattle. They were all Jews, she could tell, because they had the bands on their arm with the Star of David on them. And Mom said, looking at this group of people, it would be like if the police came to your neighborhood and they took every single person out of every home. There was a cross section of people from elderly all the way down to newborns, families of all ages and sizes. Mom noticed one young mother who was walking, holding a tiny child as she walked, and for no apparent reason, a German soldier came up, grabbed that baby, threw it in the air, shot it like a bird. She watched as the people were forced to continue to walk down the street of the town, and she said she snuck downstairs and she followed at a distance. At the edge of town, there was a large field, and someone had dug a great big pit in that field. Mom found a fence and she hid behind it and watched. She watched as the Jews were forced to stand around the edge of that pit, and as the parents covered their children's eyes with their hands. And she watched as they were shot and fell into the pit. And my mom was raised Catholic, and she had a really simple, childlike faith. But she said, watching this horrific sight, she said, I raised my eyes to the heaven and I screamed out, my God, how can you do this? How can you allow something like this to happen? She was so upset that she screamed, I don't even believe you're there. But as she kept walking, she said there was one thought that settled into her heart, into her soul, and it was this: that God gives us free will to be good or bad, to help and heal or to hurt and harm, and it's up to us to decide what we'll do. And she said it was right then that she made a promise, a vow, that if there was ever anything she could do, she would. Well, she kept walking and she finally found the right town where she knew her aunt lived, the right street, the right house. And just as she was coming up to the house, the front door opened up and out came Mom's 4 sisters. Her whole family had gone there looking for her. And she had a wonderful reunion with them. But it was very short-lived because the Germans came and they took her father away. He was an architect and they wanted him to build factories for the German war front. And in war, you do what you're told or you're killed, period. And so my grandfather and grandmother and the 3 younger of my mom's sisters, they went to be with him, but they didn't want to take my mom or the next oldest sister, Janina, because where they were going was next to a facility that trained German soldiers, and they didn't want the 2 teenage girls being close to that. A couple weeks later, my mom and aunt and sister, they went to church one weekend, and when they exited the building, they saw that they were surrounded by German soldiers who pushed and shoved and segregated people. If you were very old, you were put aside, and if you were very young, you would be put aside, but everyone who was capable of work, they'd be put on trucks. My mom was put on a truck, separated from her aunt and sister, taken to the town of Tarnopol, where she was forced to work in a munitions factory, making ammunition for the German war front. The conditions in the factory were terrible. It was freezing cold. There was barely enough to eat, and Mom became very anemic. And one day, a high-ranking German officer came by, a major. He came by to tour the facility to make sure that production was being kept up. And when he walked by my mom's section, she ended up fainting right at his feet. When she woke up, she was in the office with this man, terrified that if he thought she couldn't keep up, he'd send her further away or just have her killed. And so she pleaded with him. Please, sir, I haven't been well, but I'm strong, I'm capable, and I can do this job. Just if you could give me one more chance, please. This major in his 60s looked at this blonde, blue-eyed, very Aryan-looking teenage girl whose last name was Gut, sounds German. She could speak German, and he asked her, "Are you a German girl?" And she answered truthfully, "No, I'm Polish." He said, "I like that you're honest, but it's apparent you can't keep up here. You'll come with me. I'll give you another job." So she went with him to the camp that he was in charge of. It wasn't a concentration camp. It was a camp that housed German officers and secretaries, soldiers, and Mom's job would be serving meals in the diner, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And she was given one other job, and that was to oversee the laundry room. And it was when she went in the laundry room that she was introduced to the 12 Jewish people who were forced to work there. One was a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an accountant, a nurse. There was married couples. These were all people of means, people with beautiful homes and beautiful things like we all have that means something. Everything they had been taken from them, given to someone else, and now they were forced to live in the ghetto next door and take care of the captives' clothes. Yet these were lucky ones because they weren't in a concentration camp, but they were starving. But Mom could easily sneak food. When she was in the diner, she could sneak food to them. In fact, enough food that they could distribute amongst the ghetto. But more important than food, she realized when she was serving meals and the Gestapo was there at the diner or the SS, she could overhear plans when they were going to raid a new area of town. She could get that information to her friends in the laundry room. They could spread it amongst the ghetto. And because of their information, hundreds of people were able to leave areas before they were raided. But one night, the major had at his table one of the heads of the Nazi party in that area. And when she went to go serve the major, she heard the Nazi tell him, "Next week, don't plan on having any of your Jews here. You'll have to find substitute workers." The major actually argued, "What are you talking about? I've got quotas to fill. How am I going to get my work done without my workers?" And the Nazis said, "Hire Poles, hire Gypsies. I don't care. I have my orders that by this time next week, there won't be one Jew left alive here." Mom realized that that meant her 12 friends in the laundry room. And she had the difficult decision on whether she should tell them that in a week, even the little bit they had would be gone. But she decided she had to. And when she did, they pleaded with her, Irene, help us. Hide us, do something. She said, I have a little room above the diner. I've got a single cot that I sleep in and a wash basin. I've got no place to hide 12 people. But that night she got down on her knees and she prayed for a miracle. And in the morning she had one, because the major came to her and he said, I'm taking a villa at the end of town. I'm going to be doing a lot of entertaining. You're going to come and be my housekeeper. So she went that day with him to go look at the villa. And she said when they walked up to the front door, there on the doorpost was a mezuzah. Mom had enough Jewish friends growing up to tell her exactly what that meant. A Jewish family had lived there, a wealthy Jewish family. And there was rumors going around that wealthy Jewish families in that part of Europe often had a hiding place somewhere on the grounds big enough to hide their whole family. And she prayed that was true. So over the next couple of days, she asked the major for a pass so she could go from the camp to the villa to get things ready. And over the next couple of days, she helped all 12 of her friends escape out of the laundry room, out of the camp, down the streets of the town to the villa, down a coal chute, and into the basement until all 12 of them were there in the basement of the major's house. And she breathed a sigh of relief until the major walked through. Irene, this house is filthy. I want it scrubbed and I want it painted from top to bottom. And he made her arrive the next day with a squad of German soldiers ready to do just that. She kept her friends quiet in the basement and started the soldiers upstairs. And when they were finished, she brought the soldiers from the front staircase down, took her friends from the back staircase up, hid them in a tiny spot up in the attic for days while the house was cleaned and painted. Finally, those soldiers left and she was able to bring her friends back downstairs to the basement and breathe a sigh of relief until the major walked through again. Irene, the house looks much better now. We're going to be starting our entertaining. There'll be large parties, a lot of work, but not to worry. I'm going to bring a soldier who can help you with everything. He can sleep and live in the basement. That would not work. So she went to him and she pleaded, please don't bring a young man to be with me all day long. I'd be a nervous wreck having him here. She had to tell him what had happened to her with the Soviet soldiers. He said, don't be an idiot. Nothing's going to happen to you in my house. You're perfectly safe here. She pleaded, she begged, she assured him, I just don't need help. I can do everything myself. You'll see. He said, Irene, we're going to have parties for 30, 40, 50 people a night. Besides shopping and cooking, there's laundry, ironing, heavy lifting, repair work, gardening. One person can't do all that. She continued to plead and beg until he said, enough. I'll give you one chance. The first time you embarrass me, the first time you can't keep up, my soldier comes in. So they had this great arrangement because every morning the major would get up, he'd have breakfast, and he would leave the villa, and Mom would follow behind him with a house key. And as soon as he left, she'd put her key on the inside of the door. That way, if he came home before he was supposed to, his key wouldn't unlock the door and he'd have to ring the doorbell. While he was gone, she had the men rig up an alarm bell that she could hit if there was anybody who came to the door, and they could hear it down in the basement and know to be quiet. And every day they searched through that villa top to bottom, hoping to find that hiding place. And sure enough, they did. It was down in the basement. You had to lay on your stomach on the ground, but there was one tiny partition of wood paneling that could be removed. And when it was, you saw a tunnel that wrapped around the whole villa and ended in a small area that sat just underneath the gazebo in the side yard, a room just big enough to squeeze 12 people in. So every day, the major would get up, he'd have breakfast, he'd grab his coat, his hat, his briefcase, and he'd head out the door. Mom would follow with her key, put it in the door, and then raced to the basement door, opened it up, and let all 12 of her friends come up. The men did the heavy lifting, the repair work. The women did the cooking, the cleaning, the shopping, the polishing. And every day the major came home amazed at what a teenager could accomplish. That's how they lived for almost 2 years. Parties with the Gestapo and the SS, dining on the food that the Jews had made earlier that day. The Jews had had to be so quiet during these times they couldn't cough or sneeze for fear of being found out. At the 2-year mark, my mom had a conversation with 2 of them in the basement, Ida and Laser Holler. They'd been married for years and had never been able to have children. And now they found out that they were expecting a baby that would be born in that basement and cry and give them all away. They desperately wanted this child, but they felt like they had no choice. And my mom was given a list of supplies to go to the pharmacy so that they could terminate the pregnancy. She pleaded with them, Ida, Laser, I don't know how, I don't know why, but I believe it's a sign that we'll be okay, that everything will work out. I've already seen so many innocent people murdered. Hitler's not going to have this baby. Took a lot of convincing, but finally they all agreed they'll either all live together or they'll all die together. And life went on. Until one day, Mom had to go to town to get some more supplies for another upcoming party. And when she was in the store, she said the German soldiers came in and yelled at everyone, "Get outside." She didn't know what was going on, but when she walked out of the store, she realized the whole town had been evacuated. Everybody was now standing on either side of the sidewalk. In the middle of the street was a set of gallows that had been erected. There was a Polish Catholic family with 2 small children, and they had been caught hiding a Jewish family with a small child in their house. Mom said there were signs on every street corner saying death would happen if you got caught helping a Jew. And that day, everyone in town was forced to stand and watch what that looked like. Mom said that they hung the children first and made the parents watch. And she said, I stood there with my eyes closed. But even with closed eyes, you can see because you can feel and you can hear what's going on. And it was that day walking back to the villa, she said, I was like a zombie. All she could think of is, I can't tell my friends what I've seen. There's nothing they could do about it. But because she was so shook up when she got back to the villa, she forgot to do what she had done every day for the last 2.5 years. She forgot to leave her key in the lock. She went to the kitchen and she put her groceries down, opened up the basement door, let 3 of the women come up to help her with the evening meal. She said, we were standing there cooking and talking, and all of a sudden there was a noise at the kitchen door. And they turned, and there was the major, eyes bulging, chin shaking. He took one look at the women, whom he knew they used to work for him in the laundry room. And he turned right around and he went to his office where the telephone was. Mom told her friends, get downstairs. And she said, I ran after him and I grabbed a hold of his legs to stop him. He turned around and screamed at her. How could you do this? In my own home, under my own nose, after all I've done for you? Why? She was crying and said, they're my friends. No one has the right to kill because of race or religion. These people, they've done nothing wrong. Punish me. Kill me. But let them go. They're innocent. He screamed, turn you in? You think I can march you down to the Gestapo and tell them that I didn't know I had Jews hiding in my own house? You've killed us all. I have to have time to think. I'm going to go to my office, and when I do, don't you go anywhere. Don't you talk to anyone. As soon as he left, she ran in the kitchen. She got food and water, went down to the basement, gave it to her friends, and said, get in the hiding place. If I don't come back to get you in 3 days, It means I'm dead. You'll have to get yourself out. And she went back upstairs to wait. Finally, he came back. He went into his office, sat behind his desk, and she had no choice but to go and face him. And when she did, he reached out, grabbed her by the waist, pulled her down on his lap, and made a decision. I'm going to keep your secret, but for a price. You have to be mine anytime I ask, and willingly. Mom said there was too many people, too many lives at stake. And she never told her friends what she had to do. She said their integrity would have never let her make that decision. But they did all survive. And eventually the Soviets started pushing the Germans out of Poland, and the whole war front began to collapse. And at one point, the major came to Mom and said, I have my orders to move my unit. Are you coming with me? She said, I want to find my family. It had been years. She didn't know if her parents and sisters were even alive. And as he started making arrangements to move out, she contacted her friends, the partisans who were still out there in the forest, and said, make room. I'm bringing you 12 people and one very pregnant woman. She took her friends by twos, put them in the bottom of the major's wagon, covered them with blankets and shovels and food, and rode from the villa out to the forest where the partisans were back and forth, until all of them were there. And she stayed that last trip. And 6 days later, there was a little baby boy that was born out there in those woods in freedom. Ida and Laser named their son Roman Holler. And Mom said holding baby Roman was her payment in full for everything she'd gone through. Now, they all wanted her to continue to stay out there in the forest, but she wanted to find her family, and she left. And a lot of things happened during this time, but at one point, Mom was captured, this time by the Soviets. After all, she'd been the mistress of a high-ranking German official. The Soviets accused her of being a spy, and now she was put in a concentration camp, told she'd be sent to Siberia for the rest of her life. And she truly thought her life was over. Now, the Soviets, they hired men to deliver food to the prisoners, and a lot of times they hired Jewish men. After Mom had been sitting in this camp 2 or 3 months, one of the men they hired happened to be one of the men she had hid in the basement of the major's house. And when he came that night, he saw her and he called out, Irene, what are you doing? She was so overwhelmed at seeing a friendly face, she said, I couldn't say a word. I just stood there and cried. He left that night, but he came back with friends, and they smuggled her out of that camp. They dyed her blonde hair black, gave her false identity papers. She wasn't going to be Irina Gut, Polish Catholic. Now she was Sonia Soferstein, a Jewish refugee. They smuggled her out of Poland into Germany and left her at a displaced persons camp, where she sat for 2 years trying to put her life together. She found out her father had been shot and killed by the Germans. She found out her mother had a stroke and didn't survive. She couldn't find out anything about her 4 little sisters and assumed that they had died. As the war was winding down, there was a group of men from the United Nations who came to do interviews of the survivors, and there was an American delegate who came to the camp Mom was at. He could speak English and French, and he interviewed my mom, who could speak Polish, German, Russian, and quite a bit of Yiddish. And through an interpreter, she told her story to him. And he said the United States of America would be very honored if you would come. She wanted to try and stay in Poland, try and find her sisters, but she was wanted now by the Russians and the Germans, and she was afraid if any of her sisters survived, she could bring great trouble to them. So in 1949, she came on a cargo ship into the United States, into Ellis Island. I loved how she used to tell that story. She would stand at the bow of that boat, look at the Statue of Liberty, and said, I'm in a free country, a fresh start, a new beginning. And she said, I put a do not disturb sign over my memories. I will never talk about or think about what I've gone through. My life starts here. She came into the United States with no money, no English, and no friends or people she knew. But she was in New York City and she could speak Yiddish. And she was able to make a lot of amazingly wonderful Jewish friends who helped her find a job in the garment district, helped her get a little apartment. After 5 years, my mom became a United States citizen. And to celebrate, she took herself out to a nice restaurant in Manhattan. It was lunchtime and it was crowded. And as she was sitting there, a man came up and had said, "May I sit here in the chair next to you?" And then he looked at her. "I know you," he said. He was the UN delegate who'd interviewed her in the displaced persons camp, the very man who'd invited her to come to the United States. Well, he asked that pretty young blonde to dinner that night and the next night, and 6 weeks later, they were married. My parents moved from the East Coast out to the West Coast, and my mom became an interior decorator. She was really good. She could sell ice to Eskimos. She could sew, she could sketch, and with that little Zsa Zsa Gabor voice, "Oh, darling, we can do this and we can do that." Until I was 14 years old, that's all that I knew about my mom, that she was really beautiful and very talented and the most elegant woman you'd ever want to meet. I never heard any of these stories. True to her word, that do not disturb sign had stayed up. It wasn't until we were having dinner, the three of us, one night, and the telephone rang. Mom got up to answer it, and on the other end of the line was a college student doing a survey for a report in school, and his topic, the Holocaust never happened. It's just propaganda, drummed up by the Jews so we'd all feel sorry for them. And he was calling random people to find out what they thought. He found out, and I did too that night. What I remember is after that phone conversation, when she hung up the phone, tears streaming down her face for bringing up these memories, and her looking at us and saying, "All these years that I've kept silent about what hate does, I've allowed evil and I've allowed the enemy to win." And she said, "I am willing to go anywhere to talk to anyone so that history never repeats itself and these things never happen again." And you know, it didn't take very long until she was schlepping all over the country, like my word. You know, I have to stop right here and give you the title of the talk. Most people give it at the beginning, but I like to do it now. And it's a weird title for a Holocaust talk, I get it. But the title is Love. Weird, huh? It's not. For these things, genocide, Holocaust, hate, for these things to never happen again, love is exactly what's required. When we can be with someone, we can look to somebody else who's different than us, who speaks different, who has different beliefs, who votes differently, someone that we may not even agree with or understand. And we can say, you know, I don't know you. I may not even agree with you, but you're part of my human family. And we are all connected. And I will stand with you. And I will take the time to get to know you. And I will love you. When we can get to that place, that's when we can change the world. And you know what I've learned as my mom's daughter? But when you're willing to love like that, and I'm not talking Valentine card love, I'm talking love with skin on, love that's hard and that hurts and that takes effort. But when we're willing to love like that, your life goes like from this size to endless, the opportunities and the things that can happen. It's true. I've seen it myself. In 1982, my mom received a phone call from a young man named Roman Holler. You remember who he was? The baby that was born in the woods. Only he wasn't a baby anymore. Grown married man whose son was about ready to be bar mitzvahed. He looked all over the world for my mom, whom he called his mom, so she could go to Israel and be a part of that ceremony. That was a highlight of her life, being able to do that. But when she met up with Roman, she found out something pretty incredible. And that's what happened to the major that she'd lived with as his housekeeper. When the war was over, Major Edward Rugemer, that was his name, he ended up going back to his wife in Germany. Only she'd heard that he'd had a long affair with his young Polish housekeeper, and she didn't want anything to do with them. She refused to let him back into the house. And so he went to his friends in town, men he'd known for years. But there was rumors going around about the major. People were saying he was a Jew sympathizer, and there was big time of fear associated with that, especially in Germany right after the war. No one would let this man, now in his 70s, into the house. He had nowhere to go. He was literally forced to live on the streets. When Ida and Laser Haller, Roman's parents, heard about what happened to the major, they put baby Roman in the backseat. They were still living in Germany, in Munich. They put baby Roman in the backseat. They drove to that town. They searched the streets until they found him. And then they put him in the back seat and took him home. And Roman grew up calling him Zeta until the day he died. Can I add another word that's just as powerful as love? Forgiveness. If you want to have a life that's incredible and powerful and meaningful, if you can put those two words together, love and forgiveness, you have a power stronger than any army or any weapon, because those are the only two things that soften the hardest of hearts and open the most closed minds. In 1984, my mom was speaking to a large audience in Los Angeles, and afterwards, there was a couple right in the front row who came up and said, Irene, we're going to Poland. We'd love to try and help you find your sisters. She said, it's been 40 years. My sisters are dead. I've tried finding them. Now, Poland was still a communist country and it was limited. She gave what she knew, Janina, Maria, Bronya, Wadja, Gut. This couple went to Poland, and when they were there, they checked with the consulate, the embassies, with every local Catholic church they could find, came up with nothing. On the last day, in a taxi cab on the way to the airport to fly back to the States, they asked the cab driver if he could pull over at a little corner store so they could get snacks for the long plane ride. He did. They got out, they got their things, went up to the shopkeeper and thought, let's try one more time. And they pulled that list of names out and read it to him. Do you know these women? Janina, Maria, Bronya, Wadja, Gut? He said, I never heard of them. But there was a woman who'd been shopping in the back of the store. She heard the conversation. She came running up the aisle. She grabbed the list out of their hands, pointed at one of the names and said, this one is me. These others are my sisters. And so this couple was able to give my Aunt Bronya my mom's address. And 10 days later, Mom got, she called it a letter from heaven, a letter from all 4 of her sisters saying, we found you and we love you and we can't wait to see you. So after 4 decades, we were driving Mom to LAX to put her on a plane to Poland. You know, sharing the story is been an incredible journey for me. I used to have a horse boarding stable. I have foster kids. The last thing I ever wanted to do in the whole world was do public speaking. But her story is too important to share. And it's definitely been an honor to be able to do that. But I want to tell you that when I get to share to the Jewish Federation of North America, that honor gets bumped up to just an amazing thing that I get to do, an amazing way that I can say thank you. Because as a Christian, I've been to more federations probably than any one person in the whole world. I am the most Jewish Christian you will ever meet, and I am your #1 biggest fan. Let me tell you why. You know, when I said that my mom stopped being an interior decorator when she decided that she would schlep around the country and share the story, that was the joy of her life. That was the purpose of her being. But speaking doesn't pay nearly as much as being an interior decorator, and that was okay because she wouldn't have had it any other way. But at one point, Mom came back from speaking somewhere on the East Coast, and when she drove into the driveway, her neighbor stopped her and said, "Irene, we found your husband. He was wandering several blocks away from home. He couldn't remember how to get home. We've been taking care of him, ever since." Now, we knew my dad's memory was going, but Alzheimer's seemed to have just hit him overnight. There was no money to put my dad in a home. There wasn't even enough money for Mom to hire somebody to sit with him so that she could go travel and share the story. And I was already living up in Washington State by then. And so she just realized that her speaking days were over. A couple weeks later, or months later, I'm not sure, my mom received a phone call from the Jewish Federation on the East Coast asking her to come and share the story. And she explained to them why she couldn't, and really thought that that was it. The Jewish Federation on the East Coast contacted the Jewish Federation on the West Coast, and probably some in between. And a couple days later, my mom received a phone call from the Jewish Home for the Aged in Reseda, California. It's this really incredible facility for seniors, and especially seniors with Alzheimer's. There was just 3 insurmountable problems with them. To go there, you had to be Jewish, period. It was very, very expensive, and they had a long waiting list. But that day, when the president of the Jewish Home for the Aged called my mother, he said, "Mrs. Opdyke, I have to tell you that the Jewish Federation of North America has left us no alternative but to break every rule we have. Bring your husband in this afternoon. They will completely cover his bill. And I want to tell you that we will love him like he's our own, like he's our family, and we will honor him." And that's exactly what she was able to do. And the Jewish Federation continued to support my mom until she passed away. To be able to speak for and to honor and to encourage people of the Jewish Federation, I don't know if there's anything better that I could do with my time, because I have seen firsthand what you do with your funds and with your talents and your time. I've seen what you do in your neighborhoods and in your communities. I've seen what you do in Israel, and I've seen what you do past that. The Jewish Federation made my mother an honorary Lion of Judah, and I inherited it. It's my favorite piece of jewelry. And as a Christian, I wear this baby all the time because I want people to come up to me and say, "What is that incredible jewelry?" So that I can tell them about an organization that does what they say